What happens when a black tech entrepreneur refuses to play along with the narrative when a man walks into a media trap but rewrites the script live on air? This is the story of Isaiah Reed, a self-made CEO who sat across from a national television host, dismantled the myths of meritocracy, and told America the truth it had long avoided. What followed wasn't just viral, it was historic. It started with a single email, clean cold corporate. Dear Mr. Reed, we'd be honored to have you as a guest on an upcoming episode of The Morning Spectrum to discuss diversity and innovation in the tech space. Please confirm availability at your earliest convenience. Isaiah Reed stared at the screen for a moment, unmoved. He had received plenty of interview invites before, but this one felt different. Not because of the invitation itself, but because of the timing. Just last week, Brightcore Systems, his company, had made headlines for winning a $300 million government cybersecurity contract. It was a groundbreaking achievement, the kind that made gatekeepers nervous. His assistant Carla knocked softly before entering his office. Media request from the Morning Spectrum. Big audience. Isaiah didn't look up. I saw it. Carla studied his face. You don't look excited. Isaiah finally leaned back. They're not inviting me to celebrate. They're inviting me to justify myself. Carla hesitated. You think it's a setup? Isaiah turned toward the window, Manhattan's skyline gleaming in the late afternoon light. Let's just say if they're playing chess, they picked the wrong opponent. The studio's green room was a study in contradictions. Sterile yet meant to soothe, elegant but impersonal. Isaiah sat alone on a sleek leather couch. His phone in one hand, unread messages piling up. The wall-mounted TV showed a cooking segment winding down on live broadcast. Then came the segment teaser. Coming up next, the black tech, boom talent, or tokenism. Isaiah's lips thinned. He knew now exactly what kind of interview this would be. Not a celebration, a test, a trap. A young producer popped in, barely making eye contact. Mr. Reed, we'll mic you up in 5. Then she vanished, leaving behind silence and tension. Carla texted, watching from the control room. Remember what we said. Stay sharp. Isaiah put his phone away. His suit was crisp, his mind sharper. He looked into the mirror mounted on the wall. I built this company from nothing, he whispered. No legacy, no cushion, and I'm not about to let them rewrite my story. He stood up, fixed his tie, rolled his shoulders back. Whatever games they were playing, he was walking into that studio like it was his boardroom. The set looked like a spa commercial. Warm light, neutral tones, soothing background music. But Isaiah knew better. The battlefield often looked peaceful before the first strike. Savannah Blake sat across from him, polished, poised, and practiced. The host of the Morning Spectrum had built her brand on being fearless. But this time she wasn't just sparring with a guest, she was walking into a chess match with someone who already saw 5 moves ahead. Mr. Reed, she began with a professional smile. Your company, Brightcore, just landed one of the biggest government tech contracts of the year. That's impressive, Isaiah nodded. It wasn't luck. We outperformed competitors in all categories: efficiency, security, scalability. She raised an eyebrow. Some might say the diversity push helped companies like yours. That maybe it wasn't just performance that got you the deal. Isaiah didn't blink. Let me ask you, Savannah. When SpaceX got their NASA deals, did anyone ask if it was because Elon Musk checked the right boxes? Or is it only when a CEO looks like me that we start wondering how he got through the door? The studio went quiet. Even the cameras seemed to pause. Savannah shifted slightly in her chair. Her smile stayed, but her posture changed, more defensive now, her pen tapping quietly against her notepad. She glanced at her cue cards, then looked back at Isaiah. So you're saying race had nothing to do with it? She asked, tone light but pointed. Isaiah kept his gaze steady. I'm saying talent and execution earned us the contract, but it's always interesting how people ask about special treatment when someone like me wins. Legacy firms land contracts every day with less innovation and more connections. But nobody questions that. Savannah's lips twitched. She leaned forward. Some viewers might say that programs like minority grants and diversity incentives give an unfair edge, that in trying to level the playing field, we're tipping it too far. Isaiah chuckled softly, but there was no amusement in his eyes. You know what's unfair? A playing field that was never leveled to begin with. You don't call it favoritism when you've been standing on higher ground all your life. You call it fairness only when someone else starts to rise. A subtle tension rippled through the studio. Technicians behind the camera stood still. Savannah didn't realize it, but she had just crossed the invisible line. And Isaiah, he had only just begun. Savannah regrouped, trying to steer the interview back to neutral ground. But Isaiah had no intention of retreating. You mentioned tipping the scale, he said. Let's talk about that. Do you know how many black-owned tech startups receive venture capital? Less than 2%. Do you know how often we're denied loans despite similar credit and revenue profiles to white-owned firms? Savannah hesitated. Isaiah didn't stop. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried weight. And when we do make it, despite those odds, we get brought on shows like this to explain ourselves. To reassure America, we didn't cheat the system, that we earned it. He leaned forward, eyes locked on Savannah. Why is it that one success story becomes a reason to ignore the rest of the struggle? The studio air turned heavy. Even the lights seemed to dim. Savannah pressed her lips together. Her next card sat in her lap, but she didn't look at it. For a brief moment, she wasn't the host. She was the one on the defensive. Isaiah Reed wasn't just defending his name. He was exposing the system. Savannah took a breath and decided to drop the script, literally. She placed her cue cards on the table. Okay, she said softly, let's be real. Isaiah nodded, his arms relaxed, but his eyes razor sharp. You built Brightcore from scratch, she said. No Ivy League degree, no family legacy. Just you, that's rare. Isaiah tilted his head slightly. It shouldn't be. Savannah gave a tight smile, but don't you think stories like yours can sometimes make others feel like the system works? Isaiah's response came slowly. If one man escapes a burning house, do you call it proof? The fire wasn't real. Savannah looked away. She had no answer. Isaiah sat up straighter. My story doesn't erase the barriers, it reveals them. I got through the cracks, but I see who's still locked out. The crew behind the cameras were no longer just filming. They were watching, listening. And at that moment, everyone knew. This wasn't just a segment. This was a reckoning. The moment the segment ended, Isaiah stood, shook Savannah's hand politely, and exited the stage with calm precision. He didn't storm out. He didn't gloat. He had said what he came to say. Carla was waiting for him in the hallway, eyes wide. You knew exactly what they were going to do, didn't you? Isaiah offered a small smile. I've been black and successful long enough to see a trap coming. They left the building quietly, but the storm had already begun. Within an hour, clips of the interview were everywhere. A Twitter user posted, that moment when Isaiah Reed stared America in the face and didn't blink. Legendary, another wrote, I needed to hear this today. Every word, every pause, this man just broke the internet without raising his voice. But not everyone cheered. Here we go again, another millionaire playing the race card. One comment sneered cable news, picked it up fast. One channel called him a disruptor in the worst way. Another labeled the moment raw and necessary. By the end of the day, Isaiah Reed was the #1 trending name in the country, but he wasn't chasing clout. He was confronting truth. And truth, as it turns out, doesn't ask for permission. Isaiah spent the evening in silence, watching the flood of news coverage from his apartment window. The city below bustled like nothing had happened, yet he knew the world had shifted just a little. Carla called, We've got 30 interview requests in the last 2 hours. CNN, Bloomberg, even a podcast from Harvard Business School. I'm not doing any of them, Isaiah replied. At least not now. You sure? Yeah. This wasn't a media tour, it was a moment. But moments, he soon realized, don't exist in a vacuum. By morning, Brightcore had lost 2 corporate clients. One issued a vague press release about reviewing vendor relationships. Another simply vanished from the partnership list. Then came the anonymous threats. A letter slipped under the office door. Know your place? Carla read it aloud, voice tight. We need security. Isaiah didn't argue. He had expected this. You don't get to speak truth to power, he murmured, without the power trying to bite back. Still, he didn't regret a word. If anything, he was just beginning to understand the scale of what he'd triggered and how many people were finally ready to listen. The network released a statement, polished, safe, predictable. At the Morning Spectrum, we support open conversations and value diverse viewpoints. We acknowledge the intensity of yesterday's discussion and reaffirm our commitment to fairness. Isaiah read it twice, then chuckled bitterly. They say fairness, he muttered, but they mean damage control, Savannah. Blake, for her part, returned the next morning with an opening monologue that danced around apology without ever touching it. I respect Mr. Reed's story, she said, and I stand by the importance of asking difficult questions. Social media wasn't impressed. She didn't learn a thing, one user tweeted. She's more upset she lost control than she is about what was said. Said another, Isaiah stayed silent. He didn't need to respond. The people were doing it for him, and for the first time in his career, the silence felt powerful, not passive. It was the kind of silence that didn't ask for permission, the kind that waited for the next move. 3 days later, Carla walked into Isaiah's office holding a cream-colored envelope. It came by courier, hand-delivered. Isaiah opened it slowly. Inside was a formal letter from a major network, a primetime special offer, a televised one-on-one title, the conversation, America avoids. Carla raised an eyebrow. You going to take it? Isaiah stared at the city skyline through his window, the buildings glowing like embers in the evening light. If I do this, he said slowly, it has to be on my terms. My narrative, no edits, no spin. Carla nodded. They want a reckoning. Let's give it to them. He looked down at the letter again, then smiled, not smug but certain. If they're going to put a spotlight on me, he said, I'm going to make sure it blinds them. The days leading up to the special were unlike anything Isaiah had experienced. His team was flooded with calls from allies and skeptics alike. Some urged him to walk away to let the fire cool. Others pleaded with him to use the moment to speak for those who never got the mic. The network sent over producers, writers, and lawyers. They wanted control, wanted to shape the narrative. Isaiah refused. No scripts, no pre-approved questions. If you want my voice, you get it unfiltered. The executive producer pushed back, warning of backlash and potential advertiser pullout. Isaiah didn't flinch. I didn't ask for your cameras. You came to me. If you were afraid of the truth, you shouldn't have started this. By the time the deal was signed, every clause reflected his terms. It would be live. No editing. One-on-one, America would see him speak raw, real, and relentless. Carla stood beside him in the dressing room on the night of the taping. You ready? She asked. Isaiah looked into the mirror. I've been ready for this my whole life. The stage was set. Bright lights, silent cameras, and a red countdown blinking overhead. 3. Isaiah stepped into the circle of light. Across from him sat Savannah Blake. Not the polished version from the previous interview, but a host stripped of filters. Her eyes were wary now. Respectful, perhaps, maybe cautious. There was no script, no teleprompter, just 2 chairs and a country listening in. Savannah opened. Isaiah, last time you were here, your words ignited a national conversation. Some called it courageous. Others called it confrontational. Why speak again? Isaiah breathed deep. Because silence is survival, but it's not progress. If people like me stop talking, the system wins by default. Savannah blinked, nodded slowly. So what do you want America to hear tonight? Isaiah leaned forward. I want them to hear the stories they ignore. I want them to see what it costs to succeed when the rules weren't written for you. I want them to understand that excellence in black skin is not an exception. It's the expectation. And with that, the room fell into the kind of stillness only truth can summon. Savannah exhaled slowly. She hadn't expected this version of Isaiah. The fire in his words wasn't anger, it was precision. Every sentence was a scalpel, peeling back layers of myth and comfort. Some critics say, you're making it about race when it should be about merit, she said cautiously. Isaiah didn't hesitate. They always say that until race becomes inconvenient. Then suddenly it's the elephant in the room. He leaned in. Here's a truth America doesn't like. Merit has never been neutral. It's been shaped, weighted, bent toward those who've always held the advantage, the schools, the networks, the early access. I wasn't born into that. I built, despite that. The studio was so silent, even the floor lights seemed to hum. Savannah tried to pivot. But don't you think highlighting racial inequity over and over fuels division? Isaiah shook his head. Ignoring injustice doesn't build unity. It builds resentment. Real unity comes from truth, from accountability, not silence. He paused, letting the words breathe. The truth makes people uncomfortable, but comfort never changed anything. Savannah fell silent and the camera zoomed in slightly. Not for drama, but because the director knew something real was unfolding. Isaiah continued, his tone calm, but unmistakably firm. I'm not here to attack anyone, he said, but I am here to hold up a mirror, and America doesn't always like its own reflection. He paused, then added, we love to say we're a meritocracy, that anyone can make it, but when someone who looks like me does, the questions come not about the innovation, not about the product, but about how we got in the room. Savannah leaned forward, voice quieter now. So what's the fix? What changes that? Isaiah nodded slowly. It starts with truth, then education, then equity, not charity, not pity, equity. Give everyone the same shot and watch what we build. The audience watching live across the country didn't tweet for a moment. It was the kind of silence that hangs heavy with thought. A voice from the control room crackled in Savannah's earpiece. 1 minute to commercial. She barely reacted. Her focus was locked on Isaiah. Before we go to a break, she said, what would you say to a young person watching this who feels like the deck is stacked against them? Isaiah's response was immediate. You're not wrong, it is, but you're not powerless. He looked directly into the camera. To every young person out there, especially those who've been told they don't belong. You do. You belong in the boardroom, in the lab on the ballot. You belong wherever your mind and effort can take you. Savannah's eyes softened. The crew behind the camera stood still. Isaiah added, don't wait for permission. Don't wait to be invited. If the door doesn't open, build your own. And when they tell you that you're only there because of diversity, remind them that diversity didn't write your code, lead your project, or pitch your vision. You did. The countdown to commercial reached 0, but no one moved. Not the crew, not Savannah, not the nation. When the show returned from commercial, it wasn't the same show. Something in the atmosphere had shifted. Savannah's tone was no longer interrogative. It was curious, almost reverent. She wasn't battling for control. She was bearing witness. Isaiah wasn't performing. He was anchoring. The rest of the segment flowed like a conversation between two people who knew the whole country was listening. They talked about bias in hiring representation in boardrooms and the burden of always having to be twice as good. But it was when Isaiah said this that the internet exploded. I don't want to be exceptional just to be accepted. I want to be excellent because I choose to be not, because survival demands it. The line was clipped, captioned, and shared millions of times. Hashtags trended. Podcasts dissected the tone. Professors replayed it in class. Parents printed it and taped it to their kids' walls. And somewhere across America, young people who had felt invisible finally saw themselves in Isaiah. In his voice, in his truth. The next morning, the headlines were unanimous. Isaiah Reed redefines primetime raw, brave, unshakable truth, telling at its finest. But not all the fallout was praise. A major conservative donor pulled funding from the network. A prominent CEO tweeted that victim narratives were toxic. Anonymous emails poured into Brightcore's inbox, some supportive, others venomous. But Isaiah was prepared. He'd built armor from experience. He gathered his staff that morning. No long speeches, just a truth they could all carry. We didn't just survive the storm. We became the lightning. Carla smiled, eyes glassy with pride. And that's when she handed him the letter from the White House. An invitation to speak to the nation. The White House summit was filled with cameras, officials, and industry giants. Isaiah stood alone at the podium. He didn't bring a speech, he brought his story. He spoke about his mother who worked 3 jobs to keep the lights on, about his first prototype built in a garage that leaked rain through the roof, about walking into boardrooms where no one looked like him and never shrinking to fit. He ended with a challenge. Stop asking us to prove we deserve to be here. Start asking why we were excluded in the first place. The room rose in a standing ovation. Not because it was polished, because it was raw. In the weeks that followed, companies began reevaluating their boards. Universities revised curriculums. Conversations that were once uncomfortable became unavoidable. And Isaiah, he went back to work. He launched a scholarship fund, mentorship programs, a podcast for young founders. But most importantly, he stayed accessible. He replied to emails, showed up at high schools, walked through neighborhoods he once called home. Because he understood something powerful. Being a symbol is temporary. Being a servant endures. Years later, students would study that interview. Professors would assign essays, leaders would quote it in policy rooms, and Isaiah Reed would still be building. Not just businesses, but bridges. He would never call himself a hero, just a man who told the truth when it mattered most, because the day he looked into the camera and said, "You belong," a generation believed him. And they never forgot it. The most powerful voice doesn't always shout. It simply tells the truth clearly and without apology. Isaiah Reed reminded a nation that success shouldn't depend on skin color, legacy, or permission. He taught us that real change doesn't begin with comfort, but with courage, the courage to speak up even when your voice shakes.